Right, hi everybody, welcome back again. I want to do a very short video today just to show you how to draw a graph in Excel. I'm sure you probably know as much as me about how to do it, but I think it's worth going through in some detail just so you can avoid some common mistakes that I see. Firstly, you won't see my mug in the corner of the screen here because I want to make the Excel sheet as big as possible on your screen so you can see the numbers. And secondly, I'm using Excel 2019 version 16.41 here for my MacBook. You might be using a slightly different version of Excel, but I'm sure you can work out how to do everything if the commands are slightly different to what I'm going to show you here. Lastly, actually, you might be also using Numbers or Google Sheets to do this. They've got pretty good functionality, both of those, but one problem I do see year after year is problems in those two packages of drawing error bars, which I'll show you now. So if you really should put error bars onto your graphs, and when you do, I think it's better to do that through Excel. So if you can use Excel, please do so for your IA. Okay, so here you'll see some data that I've downloaded. It doesn't really matter what these numbers mean, we're just going to analyze them and put them into a graph. But notice I've not put units or anything which might be necessary on your data collection. I got this data from Google Data or Google Dataset Search, which you can see the URL at the bottom. I think that's a really good starting point if you're collecting secondary data because you can download huge amounts of data as zip files. It's reliable data from reliable sources for the most part, and it will also give you the exact citation that you need to write for where you got the data from. So if you are considering using secondary data, I think that's a good starting point. Okay, and you might see this is the same data that I've already used on a video that I've recorded previous to this one. That was about how to do a t-test. So I think a nice thing here is you'll be able to see me draw the graph of this data or the chart, and then if you want to skip to my other video, you'll be able to see how I decided to analyze the same data statistically, which might be useful for your own IA. Here on the bottom right, you'll see the criteria or the top level criteria for the results analysis and conclusion section for an IA for ESS. So these are the ones that relate to drawing the graph and analyzing the data. So it says for a top grade, you need to construct diagrams, charts, or graphs of all the relevant quantitative and or qualitative data appropriately. Hopefully I'll show you how to do that now. You need to analyze the data correctly and completely so that all relevant patterns are displayed. Well, this is part of that. Please look at the other videos that I'll upload to YouTube as well. And then you need to interpret trends or patterns or relationships in the data so that a valid conclusion to the research is deduced. We'll not really cover that during this video. That's more for your conclusion. Okay, so when you draw the chart of your data or the graph, please make sure you're not just displaying the same data that you've already put onto your in your data table. There is a necessity to manipulate the data and analyze it, and that's not achieved if you're just showing the same numbers as a chart rather than a table. Okay, so what I will do here is I'm going to first of all do some very simple analysis. We'll calculate the mean and the standard deviation of both of these data sets. Right, so to do that I need to type equals average, and I'll select the data I want a mean or an average for, which in this case is going to be data set A. Press enter. Okay, there's the mean of that data set. The second thing that's useful for drawing all of these charts is a standard deviation of your data set. A standard deviation is a measurement of the variance around the mean or the spread of data around the mean. So to get that, you'll type equals stdev. I'm going to choose stdev-s, which is standard deviation of a sample. And again, I select my data and press enter. I can do the same thing for dataset B, but Excel will do that for me. I can just drag the formulas across and it will calculate the mean and standard deviation for dataset B. Okay, so there we can see means and standard deviations. I'm not going to plot the raw data, I'm going to plot the means and the standard deviations, and the standard deviation will be in the form of an error bar. So to do that on my version of Excel, I'll select what I want on the x-axis, then I press Command and I select the numbers that I'm going to plot. So what I want to plot is just a chart of, in this case, a histogram, I think, of x-axis my categories, and on the y-axis the size of the mean. Now the reason I'm going to do this in a histogram or a bar chart is because it's discontinuous data. This data set is one set of data I've collected from one country, one category, and this is from another country, another category. It's categorical data. The only time when you'll be using a line graph or a scatter graph will be if it's continuous data, which means pretty much you'll be looking at something like time or distance along a transect, something like that. In I think something like 90% of all of the IAs that I'll see, a bar chart is the required chart because it's generally discontinuous data or categorical data, one category and another category. In this chart, I've only got two categories, dataset A and dataset B. So to draw the graph, you go to Insert, and I think the easiest thing is to go to the chart wizard or recommended charts. And the top one here is a bar chart. I think that's the one I'll use. Press enter, and Excel pretty much does everything for you. It puts the correct scale on the y-axis, and it's put the correct categories on the x-axis. I would suggest you get rid of chart title because the usual thing in a scientific paper or scientific report is to put your figure, paste your figure into your IA, and then underneath give this in a text box a figure number with a description. And remember, your description under your charts doesn't count towards your word count. So you can be a little bit descriptive about what this chart is showing. One thing I don't like about Excel is that it doesn't, or at least on my settings, it doesn't automatically put a box for your y-axis labels. Well, it has put the x-axis labels in. To do that, you need to go up here to Chart Element, Add Axis Titles. It's going to be my primary vertical axis. Now here you should write a descriptive title that shows what this y-axis is showing. I don't know what it's showing actually, so let's say number of apples. If you're measuring something that has units, you should put the units in here. And we don't measure apples in milligrams per litre, but I'll make up a unit. And also, if you've got a measurement where you know the level of uncertainty, you should put the uncertainty. The uncertainty is basically the smallest unit you can measure to. So let's say here plus or minus 0.1 milligrams per litre. Very important, please, you do remember the units. I see very often people just draw axes with no titles and with no units. Certainty is important as well. Okay, that's pretty much the graph that I want to put into my IA, my imaginary IA. One thing that's missing though is we did calculate the standard deviation, and it would be nice to put them in as error bars. Now this is very important, please. When you put the error bars in, make sure you're using the standard deviations that you calculated. Excel will put automatic standard deviations in, but they're not the correct ones. They're not the ones you've calculated for these data sets. So to do that on this version of Excel that I have, you select the chart, you go to Chart Elements, Error Bars. Now what you're going to have to do is go down to More Error Bars Options, so that allows you to put in the values that you've calculated yourself. So More Error Bar Options. Ignore the ones that have appeared there because we're going to change them. Now here you need to go to custom specify value, because you're going to put in the values that you calculated yourself. And you need to select the upwards error bar and the downwards error bar. The upwards error bar is going to be 1 standard deviation up, and the down error bar is going to be 1 standard deviation down. So to do that, you click on that arrow and you select your standard deviation data for dataset A and for dataset B. Press enter and you do the same for the downwards error bar as well, which will be the same, 1 standard deviation down. Press OK and it puts in my standard deviations. You can see that 1 standard deviation for dataset B is much larger than the standard deviation for dataset A, because the variation was much bigger for dataset B. That's pretty much it. Some things that I don't like about this graph are, first of all, I don't like that dark color because it makes the downwards error bar almost invisible. So you can play around with things like the fill. I think I'll change the color there to much lighter color. And there we have the error bars are much more visible. Okay, so I'm fairly happy with that. I'd be fairly happy to paste that into my IA, add a figure number and a title under it, and it's got a lot of data that I can actually talk about in my in the body of my report and my conclusion. Okay, I hope that was helpful. That's pretty much what I want to cover in this video. Please have a look at the link to the standard deviation, sorry, to the t-test and any other analysis that I put up about data analysis for your IA. All right, take care everybody. Speak to you in the class.